welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob, it's me, Diana.
And it's me, Jackie, coming in with windburn.
Where were you that you got wind burnt?
I'm taking advantage of the last days of winter and spring coming, and I went skiing today for the first time in 11 years.
Ooh.
Wow.
And I did not die.
Good.
Good job.
It's always good to not die skiing.
I didn't die. But I'm especially excited about grabbing.
About
and bagging.
And bagging?
Grabbing and bagging.
And gabbing.
Well, we haven't even said what this is why I do the intros, folks, because you got to take Jackie's anecdote, goes into a segue about how this is a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, in which every week we pick a topic and we go over that topic and relevant research articles, except for weeks like today where Diana is making a face at me for my condescending tone of voice, and Jackie is smiling because she doesn't know how to deal with this awkward banter, and we do a grab bag because we got nothing better to do in moments like these.
I love grab bags.
Yeah, it's a grab bag where we sort of each of us just picked an article somewhat at random, but not really, because if you've listened to the show for any length of time, you're like, Rob probably picked an article about, classroom management, and Jackie picked one about animals, and Diana picked one about, I don't know, something. What is your theme, actually, Diana? Because Jackie's is 100% always something about animals or something about working at a college or university setting.
Oh, I just pick things that look interesting.
Okay, so you're like all over the place. You really are spiritually grab bag. Like, you can't pin you down. Mine's like, I think I've done like video modeling is like 80% of my grab bags or something.
Let's find out what it's going to be today.
All right, let's see what it is.
I mean, it is random, right?
It is somewhat random. Yes, that's right. Originally, the concept was every 12 episodes, we just reached into a giant bag of every article and we pulled one out. But that concept went by the wayside, and now it's sort of just like whatever we're suddenly in the mood to just pick something we like.
It's not 12 episodes from the last time we did it, but we did one not too long ago, episode 224.
Yeah, this is the closest we've done one probably since the third or so year we've done this podcast.
But now they're just randomly sprinkled in when we decide we want to do one, basically. But we do have three articles prepared for discussion today, and they are as follows. Effects of enthusiastic and non-enthusiastic voice in praise on the behavior of children with autism and typically developing children by Gail Eichseth and Ferreira Eichseth, and that was published recently in 2021 in Behavioral Interventions.
Was that one Rob's?
No, wait, that was 2023. It was accepted in 2021.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right, 2023. My bad.
I'm super hip. I'm way with it with my research.
I was right. It was yours.
That was mine.
I was guessing because I didn't look to see what yours were previously because I like guessing.
Oh.
Yes, that's the one that Rob's going to talk about. We also have an evaluation of the Caught Being Good game with an adolescent student population by Bohan, Smith, and McDowell. That was published in the Journal of Positive Behavior Interventions. That's 2021.
Mm-hmm. And that's a Rob article. See, I would have assumed that was my article.
Yes, that is
if I hadn't already picked an article.
But I'm going to talk about that one. And then finally, Animal-Assisted Interventions as an Adjunct to ABA Services, Clinician Practices and Perceptions by Guy, Lair, Hariyama, Spooner, and Protopopova in Behavior Analysis and Practice 2022.
And that's a Jackie article, because everyone knows, of course, that's a Jackie article.
I wasn't even going to pick animals this time. I was looking at something else, and then I saw that one, and it's kind of long. Like, usually I don't pick ones that are this long. It's like 18 pages.
It looks really good, though.
Jackie's favorite articles. It's about animals, and it's a page and a half. That's All right. Yes. So for grab bags, we're just going to kind of go in order. Although we did forget, I do want to mention to listeners in case they're like, the sound is different, which no one has ever said to us, except for one time when somebody gave us a 1-star review because they didn't like the sound of our podcast. And that was probably 6 years ago, but I'm still very angry about it. We are recording in our new studio, which is just our old studio, but with better walls and a new floor. And we haven't cleaned it up, so it's kind of messy. So some of the sound dampening of all our board games and giant books is not fully in effect because we haven't maximized their spread in the room. So
I started listening to a new podcast, and the very first episode, the sound quality was not that good. And then in episode number 2, the woman, she goes, well, thank you for everyone who's listened to the show. Thank you for everyone who has written in, except for all the people who wanted to tell me what vocal fry is. Apparently, I have it. I'm super sorry. I can't do anything about my voice.
Is it a true crime podcast? I thought that was a requirement.
It is a true crime podcast.
Yeah, they force you. It's a requirement. When you go to true crime podcast school, you have to add your vocal fry.
That sounds terrible. And that's not even how
That's not how we do things here. That's because we're not a true crime podcast.
No. And now at the end, she says, you can leave a 5-star review unless you want to talk about my vocal fry. So we're not alone in the woes of audio.
I wouldn't have minded if this guy was like unlistenable 1 star, like the audio quality was so bad I couldn't even hear the podcast, because that is fair. You can't even get through our podcast. It sounds so bad. But he was like, really enjoyed the topic. They really sounded like they knew what they were talking about. But the audio's not very good. 1 star. It's like, dude, that's like 3 or 4 stars. Come on.
The package was delivered late.
You got to match your star review to the text. Although, thank you for leaving a review. Really appreciate it. It helps us rise the Apple Podcast.
Yeah. But you know what might actually be important is the quality of your voice, whether it's enthusiastic or not enthusiastic when you're talking.
Well, it's not really actually that important, according to research. And that was my article. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Grab bag's a little loosey-goosey. This is your first episode. I suggest listening to a different episode.
No, you can listen. Stay with us.
Well, you want to, if you're not used to the zanier side of ABA Inside Track, you probably want to come back to this one later. It's for the fans, grab bags and all. Anywho,
I'll go.
Well, I mean, they can pause it, and then they can go to a different episode where we're more professional sounding. But grab bags are a little silly. That's the point, I think. Anyway, let's talk about some articles. I'll go first, because I'm already talking. I'm going to talk about Gale et al. 2023, talking about enthusiastic and non-enthusiastic praise. Now, why might I have picked this article, you might say? Why would Jackie guess? Of course, that's a Rob article. Because as you all know, if you've listened to more than one episode, is I have what I think is a very enthusiastic sounding voice. When the sound quality is good, I have been told. All right, that's churlish is what that is. You got to check that. I am a big fan of enthusiastic tones of voice. I'm very good at modulating the sound of my voice. I can really turn on I'm having a great time. And I think I sound, unlike some people, I think I sound very genuine when I'm using my enthusiastic tone of voice. And I like thinking about, voice control and having control of voice and using different tones of voice. So when I saw this article in Behavioral Interventions, I was very excited to see what does research tell us about this? Because when we talk about praise and we talk about the delivery of praise, we always recommend it should be specific, immediate. If we're not sure if praise functions as a reinforcer, maybe paired with some sort of a reinforcing activity or other tangible item or edible. And we want to make sure that we use an enthusiastic tone of voice, or at the very least, a tone of voice differentiated from our sort of neutral instruction-giving tone of voice. So I was very curious to see, is there actually any research to back that up? It's one of those topics that I said, I hope the research points out how super important it is to have an enthusiastic tone of voice, because that is my worldview. And if they tell me that enthusiastic voice does not matter, it will really change what I think about the world and potentially rock me to my core. So let's find out together, shall we? Because of course, we all know on a grab bag, we read the articles and analyze them at the exact same time. I'm joking, of course. I read this article and I have notes about it. I'm just reading my notes. So what is praise? Praise, as a quote from the article, is an expression of admiration and approval. Praise can come in many forms, whether it be vocal or written or signed or through an AAC device. They don't mention this in the article, but I would say praise is definitely paired with facial expressions and our body language. It's sort of mentioned offhand, but I would say you can deliver a form of praise through your facial expressions, a smile per se, or body language, a thumbs up, which I guess could kind of go under signing, but I think they meant signing in terms of use of sign language, so very specific.
Texting.
You could text someone praise. I don't know if I would love praised text, but maybe. I don't know. We'll see.
I would. And easily would you like misinterpreted.
It could be easy. I read an article somewhere that depending on your generation, if someone sends you a smiley face or attaches a smiley face, it is either seen as a sign of you are happy and appreciative or you are being passive aggressive. Yes. Which, what the hell? How does the smiley face mean both of those things? That's bizarre to me. I don't appreciate it. If I send you a smiley face, audience, please note it was given in the sense of I am very happy or I'm kidding around because I like you. Even if that's not how you take it, I'm telling you that's what I mean. But now I just don't want to use smiley faces anymore. In previous research on praise as a reinforcer, there have been a lot of mixed results. Sometimes the results point to, yes, praise with an enthusiastic tone of voice is a higher quality reinforcer. Sometimes it's no, unless maybe it's paired with tangible reinforcement. So there's a real question about, okay, how much does voice modulation relate to the quality of the reinforcer when it is paired with praise? Praise is certainly important as itself because it is one of the ways that we can deliver reinforcers that are not tangible reinforcers. Usually with children, if we're not sure how much other people's language serves as a reinforcer, we tend to pair praise with language as much as possible because praise is easy to do. It is free. It doesn't really interfere with interactions. It's really hard to practice. We're doing flashcards, and if I keep giving you starbursts, it takes me 20 minutes before I can give you the second flashcard because you got to chew your starburst, right? Praise comes all the time. It's quick, and everybody uses praise to some extent or another. Typically, we use our praise statements with an enthusiastic tone of voice, whether it's a general praise or behavior-specific praise. And again, most people tend to just assume, well, I should use a happier tone of voice or an enthusiastic tone of voice when I present my praise statements because there's some sort of differential reinforcement paradigm going on here. This might be because enthusiastic tones of voice do tend to have a history of pairing with other reinforcers, and because almost all of us, especially if we have our own children, but anyone who was a child, which is everybody, has some experience, or we hope has some experience with motherese, or infant-directed speech is sort of the more technical term. And that is the tone of voice in which we use kind of varying pitches. We move our voice up. We use kind of that high pitch, like, oh, you're looking at this item. Oh, that's so cool. Which does, unlike enthusiastic praise, which is mixed results in previous research, motherese does often have associations or strong associations in research with better intentional and pre-linguistic skill development and linguistic outcomes in infants. So if you're not using motherese with infants, you really should be. But does that kind of motherese-esque tone of voice serve to make our praise more, less, or the same amount of effective as a reinforcer for older students? Let's find out, shall we? There have been previous studies, and again, the question is not just does enthusiasm as a tone of voice increase the quality of a reinforcer, but does that serve to increase the quality of reinforcer with autistic children, with typically developing children? Does it seem to matter? Previous studies looking at typically developing and ASD participants looking at enthusiastic speech did find, I think Phil Check, 2001 is the article that they cited in this current article, did point out that enthusiastic and non-enthusiastic praises did seem to differentiate. So again, 3 to 5 year olds, typically developing children, just either following instructions or doing some sort of arbitrary task. It did seem like non-enthusiastic praise wasn't that important or didn't seem to help very much with following instructions, but enthusiastic praise was paired with, a reinforcing outcome or reinforcement of the responses for these arbitrary tasks. So they didn't get in any detail in this article what that task was. There was another article or a couple other articles in 2007, 2018 by other authors looking at enthusiastic versus non-enthusiastic, specifically with autistic participants. And again, mixed results. Some of the participants seemed to show, there was more reinforcement delivered when there was enthusiastic praise, some with non-enthusiastic praise. Some it didn't seem to matter whether it was praise that was enthusiastic or non-enthusiastic. You got kind of the same increase in responses, wasn't really significantly different. But unlike this study, this was looking at autistic adults doing a momentary time sampling. Sorry, Match the sample. Sorry, I see MTS and it could be one of two things. Match the sample tasks. So all learned responses did seem slightly faster with enthusiastic praise in the case of adults doing MTS tasks. However, only one of the adults preferred enthusiastic praise during a preference assessment. I don't think you can get more mixed results than that, where it's like, no, I swear, you did like this enthusiastic praise. I don't know. I don't think I do like enthusiastic praise, right? When the response, look at your cumulative record. No, I don't think so. My verbal report is I don't care for this, right? How much more mixed do you get? So in this article, which I will admit up front, I was a little disappointed in some components of it. It was a cool article. It was a cool research study, but it was not what I was looking for. It was very translational. Yeah. The purpose was, what if we use a concurrent operant reinforcer assessment? I'm with you there. Sounds great. To look at the effect of tone of voice in praise, but only looking at enthusiasm of tone. That's the only piece that is actually being studied. So this was not done in vivo. This was done with an app, which, again, I think adds to the translational aspect of this article. So would we see a preference for enthusiastic praise or non-enthusiastic praise when we are literally looking at a concurrent operant reinforcer assessment in which children are pushing buttons on an iPad screen? So again, that's where I kind of get a little less excited about the article and the procedure. Again, all very solid. Like, everything here is very solid. But when you read those articles and the thesis statement, the hypothesis is so fascinating, and then you get to the procedure and you're like, oh, that's not how I would have done it. And then you get results and you're like, no, everything here checks out in terms of being a good paper, but it just wasn't what I wanted out of a research paper. You have to
start somewhere, right?
Exactly.
So that's the idea with the translational pieces. Let's make sure all of those nitpicky technological details are nailed down, and then from there we can hopefully generalize outwards to other less structured settings.
Yes. And that's how you know that we should be hosting a podcast where we discuss research, because we're talking about how the research made us feel in a way that you might talk about the season finale of The Last of Us. That's how much we care about this stuff, folks.
I can't watch that show.
Oh, why not?
The first episode made me super anxious and my blood pressure spiked, so I decided not to.
Oh, I played the original, the game, so I know how it ends. Although I wonder if it'll be different.
Remember the show 24?
Oh, yeah.
With Kiefer Sutherland?
Yeah.
That one really stressed me out.
That is a show that was very of its time.
Yeah, I think so. The fact that we had them all on DVR, that also tells you a little bit something.
Oh, or DVD.
No, they were on our DVR.
Oh, they were on our DVR. Yeah, I never finished the show. That first season, though. Really great. Anywho, let's talk about enthusiastic tone of voice, shall we? So we had 21 participants with ASD that were matched by developmental age with 20 typically developing children. So the developmental age for the ASD group was about like 32 months, whereas the typically developing participants were 37 months chronologically, which again, I wasn't quite sure why they wanted to match by developmental and chronological age rather than just chronological age or just developmental age. That was a little odd to me. For the ASD participants, they were all about 68 months, so about 5 years old. They had 6 different praise statements, which were, well done, good, awesome, wow, superstar, amazing, that were done in either an enthusiastic or a non-enthusiastic tone of voice. And again, these were chosen by lots of observations of discrete trial training sessions. So I'm very happy that they found at least 6 different phrases being used rather than, yep, good, uh-huh, yep, good, awesome, uh-huh, yep,
well done,
good, uh-huh,
wow, superstar.
That's not was that that was what we sounded like when we both worked in a preschool. I was the enthusiastic
one.
That's
not fair.
No, you sounded very happy, Diana. I know you did. They had a female vocalist or female teacher doing the sounds and would do both the enthusiastic and non-enthusiastic tone of voice. And you might say, how do they define enthusiasm? Well, they defined it as a varied sing-song intonation with pitch and volume above normal conversational tone, and non-enthusiastic as a monotone intonation with pitch and volume of normal conversational tone.
Awesome.
Great! Whoa!
Man, I would hate that.
No, that's terrible.
And they would just do these sort of like minute-long test sessions with this app for each participant. They'd kind of hand them an iPad. There'd be a red square and a yellow square on the iPad. Each one would either be enthusiastic or non-enthusiastic when you pressed it. And it was alternated across participants, so there was no control for red was always enthusiastic or non-enthusiastic, right? And then after 5 seconds, I believe it was after the button was touched, the position of the squares would sort of change or move randomly. You touch the square, the screen goes black, the phrase randomly is said, And the app is the one recording how frequently did the participants touch each of the different squares. Also, how much did they just sort of touch the screen, not within either of these boxes. So you pretty much just hand a child an iPad and say, touch whatever you want on this screen. If they don't touch the screen, they did a gesture prompt. And then if they still didn't touch anything, they'd use manual guidance to have them touch something on the screen, right? And then statistics occurred. So you get all this data from random buttons being pressed. And after the buttons were pressed, someone saying awesome or awesome, either way. And then they looked at various correlations. How often were participants responding to each of the buttons? Was there one they touched more? Were they allocating their response touches to both of them equally? Really kind of the definitions were responding to enthusiastic square meant that they touched that square that was associated with the enthusiastic tone of voice 55% or more of the time. If they touched the enthusiastic square 44% or less of the time, noted that they probably did not prefer enthusiastic tone. They like the non-enthusiastic tone, and anything in between they considered equal. Right. So what they found by looking at kind of the statistics of how much were the kids pressing each button were that the children with ASD diagnoses allocated more of their button pressing, so they're responding, to the enthusiastic square. Though, again, it wasn't like all of them did. It was still kind of variable. But 71% of the participants from that group touched the enthusiastic square 55% or more of the time. Only 14.5% touched the non-enthusiastic square or touched the enthusiastic square 44% or less of the time. And then the rest, so again, another 14.5% sort of touched anywhere in between 44 to 55% of the time were touching that enthusiastic square. They also noted that the students' IQ scores were positively associated with non-enthusiastic praise. So again, there's a correlation between your score on an IQ test and whether you seem to like enthusiastic or non-enthusiastic praise, or at least choose the button that just has a tone of voice that's enthusiastic or non-enthusiastic.
Now, do you think that maybe they thought it was funny?
Well, there are a lot of reasons, and this is kind of why at the end I soured a little on this article. But to finish up, though, what about those typically developing children? They didn't seem to really have a difference in response allocation. I'm coming to that. I'm coming to it.
Okay, let's get there.
So when it comes to it, it does seem like children with ASD seem to prefer a tone of voice that is enthusiastic. Children that have a higher IQ, a higher developmental age, or fall under the category, or with in the typically developing participant pool, seemed to prefer a button press that produced a non-enthusiastic tone of voice. And the authors then are asked, well, why might that be? And they, posit some hypotheses. I think are good hypotheses. One might be, well, based on maybe IQ or developmental age, it might be that there's a better understanding of the semantics of the phrase being spoken. So they understand that the word wow or awesome tends to be paired with a praise statement, or has been praised with enthusiasm more in the past. Therefore, the tone of voice is not a relevant factor for children of that age. Okay, that could be. Whereas maybe children, autistic children, might not quite understand the semantics of some of these terms, so they are paying closer attention to the tone of voice that phrase is delivered in. Okay, I think that's a possible hypothesis of why these results might be. The authors also mentioned that the enthusiastic tone might be because the autistic participants may have had a longer history, or an educational history, in which they had someone say something in an enthusiastic tone of voice and also deliver edible reinforcement. So that enthusiastic tone of voice based on their learning history may just be a higher quality or be paired with higher quality of reinforcement in the past. That part I wasn't quite sure of because, again, they didn't really control for how much children have been praised throughout their lives. I mean, I know I went out of my way. I was told once by somebody in this room that I don't need to praise my child for their manding as much as I did because the reinforcer came from the delivery of whatever it was they were asking for. Because I went whole hog when the kids would ask for things when they were little. I'd be like, you did a great job asking. And then I delivered the item. And I was told, you don't need to do that. By somebody. I won't say who it was. Jackie's
it was definitely me.
Jackie happened to be there at the time.
I came over and I was that's the kind of friend I am. I just bash people's parenting.
Yeah, so maybe for some kids it was like, what? Do you not want me to comment?
No. Please do. I was just making hand gestures.
Maybe it was they found that tone of voice kind of annoying and babyish. And so if they were... Yeah. Maybe they didn't like it for that reason. And then the other thing I was going to say is during the pandemic, I got the ChoiceWorks app for my child who I was watching while I was also doing my full-time job. And with ChoiceWorks app, you can set up a schedule for them, and then you can touch each of the pictures, and it will state what's happening on the picture out loud. And so you can either record your voice or there's like voice in it already. It's a very cool app and has many uses. But some of the pre-recorded voices sound kind of monotonous. So there's one that says play a game, but it's in this like absolute monotone. So it goes, play a game, like that, play a game. And our son loved it, and he would just press it over and over again because it sounds like a little robot voice saying it. And so I wonder too if that's why I said maybe they thought it was funny. The like lack of emotion sometimes is maybe more interesting.
Yeah, to some extent, this reminded me of all the apps I remember in preschool where you'd get the answer right and it'd say, great job. And then if you get the answer wrong, it'd be like, boing, sploing, explosion sound. I'm like, well, of course the kid's going to press the wrong button. That's the way better sound. Most young children don't think, oh, rats, I was really hoping to, get my phonics correct here. They love cool sounds and explosions on the screen, right? So yes, and the authors do note this is a study with some limitations. Were the participants really discriminating? This is a very small sample size that was used. They didn't have a control square. So, were the children just sort of pressing buttons somewhat randomly? Or was there just a button they would have pressed for fun, right? Was it the fact, like you said, Diana, was that technology or the voice that came out, just the fact that there was a voice with technology impacting results? I mean, I'd expect results to be closer to chance, but, there's always a possibility that the children were just pressing buttons and whatever one made a sound was the one they just kept pressing regardless. They didn't do a color preference assessment. So, and again, this is not in vivo praise. And while I think it might be fun to say, yes, we've definitively proved that enthusiasm by itself in a vacuum is or is not a component of reinforcing praise statements, it also is one of those things of who cares? It doesn't matter if it is or is not. As long as it's not a punisher or something, most people probably would rather deliver praise with enthusiasm. Though again, maybe not. There's another study you could do. Do people like being enthusiastic with their praise? I know I do, because when I'm in a bad mood and I praise enthusiastically, it puts me in a good mood automatically. It's kind of a fake it till you make it tone of voice thing, right? Anyway, so a study that I was hoping would answer a really fun question and sort of did it in a very translational and...
Well, there's just more to do.
Not as exciting way. I was a little sad.
There might be more to come to fully answer that question.
Again, good study. Very cool. Very interesting how they looked at the problem. It just wasn't the way I wanted to look at the problem myself. So, oh well, I guess I would have to do the if I want the research that I want to read, I have to do it myself, right?
There you go.
All right. Well, let me enthusiastically say we'll be right back with even more ABA Inside Track Grab Bag. Don't go away.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
And we are back diving into our ABA Inside Track grab bag of articles. But before Jackie and Diana share their grab bag articles, I want to remind listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. By listening to the show, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish listening to the show, then either go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, or click the link in the show notes on your podcast player. That'll take you directly to a place where you can purchase CEs. But you're going to need to know our 2 secret code words. The first one is fireplace. 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 It's a place where you put a fire so it doesn't burn your house down. Fireplace. Most fireplaces these days are pretty small, but if you ever go to old New England houses or old New England villages, they're huge because they needed that fireplace running all day so they could cook and do all sorts of fun stuff. Anyway, fireplace. All right, who's diving into the grab bag next?
It's me. It's my turn. All right, so I chose an article that talks about a variation on the good behavior game. And we've talked about the good behavior game a few different times already, but I think it's always worth revisiting because it's, to me, a really interesting topic. I also wanted to pick an article from a different journal. So this is from the Journal of Positive Behavior Interventions, and it is one that you can access for free as well. So if anyone wants to go check that out. So as many of you know, the good behavior game is a classroom management system that functions well. It's well researched, and it works as an interdependent group contingency, meaning everyone's behavior in the group has to sort of cling together and function as a unit in order for the people in that group to receive the reinforcer at the end. There's a very thorough review in this article of the GBG research thus far, and there is so much out there. Like, I knew there was a lot of research on the good behavior game, but there is a lot. So you can check out some of those other articles if this is an area that's of interest to you. There are also some different versions of the good behavior game, and we've discussed them in some capacity, but here we're going to kind of lay out what those are a little bit more.
And is there a section of the show where we might tell the listeners where they could find other episodes where we talked about the good behavior game?
Normally there is pairings, but I don't typically do them for grab bag.
I don't think you do them typically because this is the first grab bag since you invented that section of the show.
Okay, well, we'll see if I come up with pairings.
You know, enthusiastic tone of voice versus pairings. I love pairings, okay? That wins. I press that button. I want to hear the pairings.
Okay, all right. I'll see what I can do. So even though there's some different versions, the literature on them all supports the use of the GBG as far as reducing disruptive behavior in the classroom. And then I know we've referenced it before as well, but some people, including Embry in 2003, have used the term behavioral inoculation with respect to the GBG because its use in elementary school is predictive of later positive outcomes, even into high school and adult years. However, some people do have a criticism towards the GBG, and that is that it can be viewed as having a negative aspect to it. Because the way that it typically works is the students in the classroom are divided into teams and the rules are clearly stated. But if someone in the group doesn't follow the rules, then a tally mark is added to the board. And if you surpass a certain number of tally marks, then you don't receive the reinforcer. So it's kind of got a response cost thing going on. And just to add on to that, if the teacher were to do that right at that moment in time, then the other students could also tell like who lost or who got the tally mark for their crew. Right. And then that student could sort of be targeted for that reason. So another way to do this is to kind of just turn the whole contingency on its head. And instead of getting a tally mark when something goes wrong, you instead get points for when things go right. So if everyone in the group has followed all of the rules, then you get a point instead. So you're not singling anyone out in this way. And the literature sometimes just calls that the GBG as well, even though it's reversed, or sometimes it calls it the GBG plus reinforcement. Or sometimes it's called the Caught Being Good game, the CBGG. This study references it as the CBGG. And so that's what we will term it as moving forward. So they give us a nice rundown on all of this literature, but they do say most of it's been done with elementary school age kids, less so with adolescents. And there's also some questions remaining, particularly when you look at those older groups, about how should you best deliver the feedback component. Does it have to be done where you like go and like mark a tally mark on the board? Does it have to be delivered immediately? Is there some wiggle room with respect to those? The studies that have looked at that, they did the full GBG and then they like tried to remove parts of it. But because they did it in that order, you don't necessarily know if there are carryover effects. So this study wanted to remedy that as well. So the purpose here was to evaluate the Caught Being Good game with an adolescent group, and then to compare the Caught Being Good game with immediate and delayed feedback, and finally to look at social validity. So the participants in the study were a class of 21 students. The study was conducted in Ireland, so they were Irish students, and they were in what's called the first year of secondary school. If you're in the US, that translates to like 7th grade. If you're in neither of those places, the students were 12 to 14 years old. And the teacher she was 33. She was a math teacher. She had 5 years of teaching experience, but no experience with the good behavior game.
Did you like long walks on the beach or, reading books?
They didn't include that information for us.
Has she been watching The Last of Us? What does she think?
I don't know. I don't know. This probably not, because this probably happened before that was even an option.
Well, she could have played the game.
Yes. The video game, not the good behavior game. She had no experience with that game.
I'd like to see the good behavior game with a reskin using The Last of Us, please. It'll be very popular.
All right. The materials
Pedro Pascal faces all over the classroom
were very simple. They had a copy of the rules. They had a leaderboard that went up on the whiteboard in the classroom. And then they had some prizes. The prizes, they said, were ID'd via a preference assessment. Then they also said that the teacher recommended the prizes. And I'm not exactly sure how they came up with them, but they were very well received by the students. So I will say that. And they included school cinema passes, school shop tokens, positive notes written home in the after school journals, and stationery. Already sounds like a very nicely enriched environment at that school if they had a shop and cinema. So that sounds kind of cool, but we didn't get any more info. There were 2 dependent variables. One was academically engaged behavior. That's what they were looking to increase. And one was disruptive behavior. That's what they were looking to decrease. The teacher contributed by identifying things that she wanted to see and things that were disruptive in the classroom. So the academically engaged behavior could be things like reading aloud, copying from the board, talking to the teacher about assignments, or just oriented towards your work and not engaging in disruptive behavior. And then disruptive behavior was further broken down into motor behavior, such as being out of your seat, putting your head on your desk, or futzing around with objects, or verbal behavior, such as talking to a peer, shouting, or singing. They did 4 sessions a week, 20-minute sessions, broken down into 15-second intervals. The academically engaged behavior was measured via momentary time sample, and the disruptive behavior was measured via partial interval recording. Even though this was quite complex, they had very good IOA. They also did a social validity survey. Everyone got their respective versions of the intervention rating profile that was appropriate for them, and they asked 8 questions, which included things like, did you like playing the game? Would you want to play it again? Do you think that this helped you in math class, etc.? And then the procedures for the study were, again, pretty simple. There was a baseline in which it was regular classroom instruction, nothing special occurred, disruptive behavior was consequated as it usually was with verbal warnings, negative journal notes written home, and getting sent to the head teacher if needed.
Were they like, dear diary, today my class was terrible. Billy was so
I know,
mean.
because initially I was like, what's a positive journal note? But then when I read this part, I think the teacher must write it home. Yeah. They get
it's a lot of extra work to just chew out your students in a note home.
I'm actually guessing on that. I'm still not 100% sure, but I think that's what that must have meant. And then they noted that prior to the intervention, the teacher got a training session. They tried to fit it all into one of her free block periods, but it didn't quite fit. But they did as much as they could. They showed her how to use the timer, which she was going to need to look at the intervals for the game. They talked about the reinforcers. And then because they didn't really have time to have her practice and give her feedback, they decided to do that in the first 2 sessions of the actual intervention.
I appreciated this article for the fact a training session actually sounded like what I usually see in training sessions, which is there's not enough time to do this just in a random, we got 30 minutes till the kids get back from lunch. Usually takes a little bit longer.
Oh, yeah. That's true. And then from there, they moved into the intervention, the CBGG intervention. To do this, they did some setup. There were 3 teams because there were like 3 rows of students in the class. So remember, there were 21 students, so there were 7 per team. They cleverly planned ahead and split up the disruptive students, so they were across the groups. Each team could choose their own name. They explained the rules, and they explained that when the timer went off, every 5 minutes, the teacher would provide or award points if the groups were following the rules.
That was at the time of the rule. Or was that for the full 5-minute interval? I couldn't quite tell from that article.
Well, actually, I believe it was at the time.
That's usually how I've seen it done in research. That's how I've done it in practice too, because it's very challenging to say, has every group been great for 5 whole minutes?
Yeah, because she's also trying to teach as well. Yeah, I believe you're right. That was a good question. But for the teacher, they did note that she didn't have to award the points right exactly at that moment in order to change up the predictability a little bit. So anytime in the next minute, she could note what the points were that were awarded. And there was a predetermined points criterion that was set at the beginning of the week. And the students knew what the points were that they needed in order to get what was called the top prize. And they knew what the prize was. And then even if their group didn't get the top prize, they could still get smaller prizes.
Was everyone trying to win the top prize?
Everyone was trying to win the top prize. They did not say what constituted the top prize, but I assume like those cinema tickets probably were a hot commodity.
Kids want to go see Banshees of Inisherin.
Yeah, I'm sure that was it. And then in the feedback condition, that was just when they needed to give the teacher extra feedback in order to ensure that her integrity was at least 80%. And then they did a comparison between the CBGGD, which was the delayed feedback condition, in which at the end of the class period, the students found out how many total points they got for the class, and the CBGGI, which was the immediate feedback period condition, in which at the end of the 5-minute interval, the teacher directly added the points to the leaderboard that was taped up onto the whiteboard.
So one version, it was at the end of the class, I wonder how you were doing, and the other was every 5 minutes.
Every 5 minutes.
You got that feedback.
Which probably got old for the teacher. The experimental design was a reversal design that was an AB, AC, AB, AC design, in which A was baseline, B was delayed feedback, and C was immediate feedback.
It was an abracadabra design.
Basically. So you might be wondering what the results were. They were that both the delayed condition and the immediate feedback condition were effective. The academically engaged behavior increased and the disruptive behavior decreased compared to baseline in both of these conditions. In baseline, the appropriate behavior was around like 60% of intervals, and the disruptive behavior was around about 45% of intervals. So there was definitely room for growth in both of those areas. In the final phase, which was the immediate feedback phase, the appropriate behavior was around 85% of intervals, and the disruptive behavior was around 20% of intervals. So they made some nice gains. Some of the later baselines were a little bit higher in comparison to the previous, but there was still experimental control demonstrated, and overall that's actually not such a bad thing, right? Because hopefully you'd see some transfer of stimulus control away from the game directly to the teacher themselves. They also did a really nice job in the study of referencing the What Works clearinghouse criteria a few times, and they kind of like tattled on themselves by saying like, oh, we only got three data points in some sessions instead of the 5 that was necessary.
I was questioned, like when I read those phrases, I'm like, well, why didn't you just do the 5? You clearly knew that 5 was the number you were shooting for. Like, could you not? Like, was it June? You like had to hurry it up?
Probably.
You know, couldn't just do 2 more per session?
Probably time constrained. They didn't say why, but I just thought it was kind of nice that they like noted those things. And then they also gave us an effect size score as well for the mean differences between the conditions. And it was a very large effect size. It was around 0.6, which is just plenty big. So that was nice as well, right? We got the data in that format too. And then they gave us some info on the social validity rankings, which were pretty good. 83% of the students liked the game. 77% said they liked playing the game. 89% liked those prizes. So however they determined them was fine.
Were they enthusiastically delivered prizes?
We don't know.
Oh.
50% thought it helped them do better in class, but we don't have any information on their actual like
whether
learning
they did do better,
or participation in class in that regard. And 89% thought the game was fair. Only one student was really negative on their scoring of the game. And then the teacher as well was overall positive, but did say that some students needed additional behavioral strategies. But that's totally fair, because when we talk about PBIS interventions, this is like the first level of intervention. And for some students, that's not enough. They may need something more. So that doesn't, to me, is not a knock against the validity of the study.
No, and I hear that sometimes from teachers, of the sense of like, yeah, but I don't think everyone is going to improve, to which I say, I understand that everyone's not going to improve, but wouldn't you rather do one thing that helped almost all of your students improve than do nothing at all and then do some sort of like elaborate, super complicated thing for a student? And then the rest of them are probably not doing as well as they could do in terms of at least, time on task, disruptive behavior type, responding in your room.
And maybe they'll get just a little bit better. They don't have to get a lot better.
Right? Yeah. I mean,
right?
How do you, we assume like, I assume that kid's always off task. He's never going to, you don't know how well that child will do.
Right.
We do not. So in their discussion, they noted that they were able to address that previous limitation that was present in some other studies with regard to feedback, because here they started with the delayed feedback condition first, and then later moved to the more traditional immediate feedback condition. So we're able to see that comparison piece without exposure to the, maybe more stringently followed conditions of the GBG beforehand. And both were effective. So they were able to say that if delayed feedback is easier for the classroom, then the differences between the two were pretty minuscule. So you might be able to do that. They also noted that the responding was actually slightly more stable in the delayed condition as well. And they said that might be due to the teacher not having to go and tally up the scores every 5 minutes, which was probably disruptive to the lesson. So that was another advantage to that as well there. They also, changed what had been done previously, because they only got those big prizes, the top prize, at the end of the whole week. Mm-hmm. So that was another way in which it was delayed too, and it continued to be effective. So at least with this older group of students, this was a great model to use, and it wasn't particularly cumbersome. As far as we could tell, the students liked it, the teacher liked it. It removed that potentially punitive component of the GBG. And their suggestions were to keep going and look at this model as well with maybe high school age students too.
I love classroom management group contingency research, because increasingly every time I read one of these articles, it makes me so happy, because it feels like one of those procedures where you can share it with someone. This is what the good behavior game was in 1969. And a teacher can say, but what if I did this? What if I added this? And you say, yeah, probably. I don't know. It's probably going to work just fine, because all the research points to add this. It works out just great. Take this away. It works out just fine. Don't worry about it. It just feels like it is one of the few, you can be as sloppy as you want with it to some extent, and it's still relatively effective compared to baselines or just doing nothing. Or just doing kind of, hey, cut it out, stop that, I don't like that. I am always shocked that classroom management is not something that every teacher running a classroom doesn't have some sort of a system in place. Because even if they did a bad system, I feel like it would be more effective than just, hey, cut it out, hey, stop it. Is it more effective than just using good teaching practices? No, there's a good research question for you. But I bet both together still would have that additive effect. So, thank you, Dinah. I love this. Thank you for bringing this to the grab bag. All right, Jackie, let's hear about animals. What are they doing? What are these animals up to?
So this article, I told you I wasn't going to do animals. Like this, I wasn't like looking for an animal article.
Mm-hmm. I don't believe you. I just don't believe it, Jackie. I'm sorry.
I know, you shouldn't. But I wasn't. And then I saw this, and I actually stopped because I didn't know what AAI was, which is the Animal Assisted Intervention, and I didn't know what it was. So I was like, oh, I'm going to just see what this is in the abstract, and then I'm going to find my other article. But then I read the whole thing, and it was so long, and I never pick long articles, that I was like, okay, now I have to do this one because I read it, right? Like I read the whole thing. I was like, oh, fascinating. And because for me, I never, as a behavior analyst, I never thought about including animals in my therapy sessions. Like that didn't even cross my mind. Like... So just to have this like title, so the title right again is as an adjunct to ABA services, I was just like, it wasn't like, hasn't even like across my mind. And now I feel a little like I've been left out, but not really when we get to the results. But yeah, so, they talk about how pets are really prominent in our society. Over 57% of U.S. households have pets. 48 million people have dogs. And when I read that, I'm thinking it's probably more now with...
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's
right? With the millennials and, like, them buying houses for their dogs and stuff. And I was just laughing about that.
The pandemic puppies and stuff,
Right? And then, they say that we don't just coexist with our animals, but we have them because they make more enjoyable experiences for us. They help us have better lives. And then they were like, oh, yeah, and they could also be service dogs. I like that they just kind of, like, threw that in there. And, yeah, so then they said, but we really haven't, there hasn't been a lot of research on animal-assisted intervention, so they term that AAI. And from the article, that's defined as a goal-oriented and structured interventions that intentionally include or incorporate animals in health, education, and human service. So, for an example, social work, for the purpose of therapeutic gains in humans. So, when I read this, I was thinking here, when I was trying to conceptualize this, when dogs go to nursing homes or colleges to, like, reduce stress levels, when people go to, like, horse therapy to gain confidence. And then, so...
What do they gain confidence in? Their ability to be near horses?
No, just confidence in themselves, because horses are big and scary, and then they're on them and they're, like, riding them. That's like one of the purposes of overall equine therapy is, like, gaining confidence and that sort of thing in yourself.
Okay. I have not kept up with animal-assisted interventions, and I am someone who is very positive on the idea of adding animals and animals having an additive effect, though I do find a lot of times the definition of therapy, I'm always a little skeptical.
Yes, sometimes, right? But who knows? So what they wanted to say is that, like, these AAIs can be standalone with just animals, or they could be in conjunction with other treatments, and they have been reported to be in other treatments such as speech, PT, OT, counseling, and special ed. Specifically, or they say notably, the young children that have a diagnosis with autism might use these services, and there's been not a lot of research, but a lot of opinion-based testimonials that there's benefit from these. And so they say that the mainstream media talks a lot about the benefits of having a dog with you, like, we got you an autism therapy dog, and now you're talking and you're interacting. Who knows? I don't know. Like, right? We haven't done the research yet. And I was just thinking when I thought of that, it's an episode where I used to watch Heartland, which is so bad. Don't anyone get into Heartland.
Is that the one with what's her face from the OC?
No.
Oh, what's that show?
Heartland is a Canadian show. It's got like 17 seasons. I started watching it when I had COVID and I was in my basement, because that's when you had to quarantine, right, from your family. Yeah. And I was like, I need a really long show. It's about horses and, like...
They're on a ranch or something?
Yeah, they were on a ranch, yeah. I probably told you about it, because this was one of my obsessions. I had to try to get it done. I was, like, so obsessed I would watch it at work.
I want to say our sister-in-law was watching this show at one point.
Yeah, she was. But I was like, oh, it's lunchtime. I'm going to shut my door and eat lunch.
By our sister-in-law, I mean all three of our
yeah, I know. Yeah,
that's how that works.
She's the one that got me into it. But in one of the specific episodes, one of the secondary characters has autism, went to the ranch, was completely nonverbal, couldn't follow one-step directions, got on a horse, started talking. And, like, the main character was like, see, horses are magical.
I think I would have turned that show off right then and there. But, like, nope, thank you, but no.
But, yeah, so there's a lot about mainstream media saying, animals can be really helpful. They're, like, they can revolutionize things. But there's not a lot of research on the actual effectiveness of AAI. And the research that's out there does have some positive outcomes or mixed results. There's really none that have negative outcomes. But for the majority of them, there are a lot of methodological flaws in those research. So we can't say, like, oh, yes, this is ironclad research suggesting that this is a positive thing to do.
I guess a lot of social validity surveys, do you like having a dog there? And, like, most people probably, oh, yeah, it was nice. Yeah, dog's cool.
Yeah. Even the leaders in AAI field said themselves that people have exaggerated the claims of the positive outcomes, but people still seek it out, right? So the authors suggested that many may use AAI in conjunction with ABA because number one, we're working with young children with autism, and that seems to be a common place, like kids and animals working together. The animals may already be there, right? Because everybody has a pet or has access to one. And because ABA sessions are very long and intensive, right? You might be with someone's home for like 6 hours a day. There's a more intimate relationship that can be formed. So parents may feel more comfortable asking the therapist to use AAI within their sessions. So another thing they said that, so 2 research studies within the behavior analytic field looked at preference for service dogs and looked at animals as reinforcers and saw mixed results. And so even though there's been a lot of suggestive positive gains, right, using an animal within an intervention is not without risk. And they're going to talk about that, such as injury, some negative impacts on animal wellness, and just misuse overall. And right now, there's no policy or oversight using animal-assisted interventions. So what they wanted to do, they could find no peer-reviewed literature that explored ABA clinician incorporation of AAI into ABA services. So they asked 2 questions. What's the prevalence of ABA clinicians who have incorporated animals, any animal? We'll see that in a few, which is amazing. Into ABA services with what frequency, how, what types of animals, and then what are the clinicians' perceptions about incorporating animals into ABA services, right? Spoiler alert, someone did it with donkeys.
Whoa.
Wow.
And cattle.
Cool.
They just had one hanging around while they ran their
They just said here are the different types of animals. But I just was like, cool.
It's an article where they just list animals. Like, here are animals.
Here are some animals that people said. Yeah.
Table 1 for all the animals.
I think there is a table like that. So they emailed all active BACB participants. So how you could be included in this study is that you were an RBT, a BCBA, a BCBAD, and you worked with young children, and you were in the United States.
I don't remember getting this email.
I don't know either. But the survey was created by the authors and did a comprehensive review of the literature, and then they had a board of experts across like education, special ed, like a ton, and like so they had 57 multiple choice and open-ended questions across 6 sections. The sections included demographic information, animal incorporation into sessions practices, looking at how, if they felt they could incorporate animals, the desirability of having animals in your sessions, the feasibility of that, if they had any knowledge in animal-assisted interventions, and attitudes about human-animal interactions with children and youth. So yeah, so I was just interested. They said out of the 96,000 total BACB certificates, 41,000 were sent recruitment emails. So maybe you didn't make the cut, Rob.
What the heck, man?
They used
cool.
I know, maybe you're not though. So they used both qualitative and quantitative analysis across these subdomains. So full disclosure, this is just a survey, right? To get some information on are we even are behavior analysts using animals in their research. So they had 544 people complete the survey.
That's very, very low.
It is, yeah. The majority of the participants were BCBAs, 274, followed by RBTs, 221, and only 34 BCBADs did. And they're like, I don't have time for this. Right? That's what the BCBADs were saying. And they said that overall, the demographics do align with how many BCBAs are out there. Like there was more early career BCBAs that filled it out than mid or late career, right? Because we know there's been a bust. The majority of people were female, which also makes sense. But they did say that there was an overrepresentation in the Northwest with Northeast, with 154 people in the Northeast and only 67 and 53 people in the Midwest or Southwest. So I was like, go ahead, Northeast. That's us.
You know, I would have filled it out as one of these overrepresented BCBAs in the Northeast, but I don't think I got a copy.
Yeah,
I'm really mad about this now.
So you should go back into your
How dare you, authors? Send me a random survey.
And so, yeah, so they looked about that. They looked at geographic work location, all of that. And then they asked about animal incorporation practices and intervention characteristics. So they asked, would you consider incorporating animals into your practice? 56% said yes, 43% said no. And then they asked, do you incorporate animals into your practice? And only 19.7 said that they do incorporate animals in their practice, while 80% say they don't.
Did they give any more specificity as to what it would look like? Because for me, I would not consider it simply because I don't have easy access to an animal. I have no clue what it would look like. So it's like, no, I'm not competent in this. I would never.
So later on, they do. What if you said yes to the do you incorporate animals? Then they had some. Then they went further into it, and they were asking like how and what does it look like, and we'll get to that. Yeah. So that's just interesting there. So they said that it's fascinating here that the people that reported yes, they are incorporating animals were mid-careerers. They were us using animals, incorporating animals. Out of the 107 people that said yes, most of them were mid-careers doing this.
They just had nothing better to do. They're in the middle of their career. They're like, guess it's time for animals.
Yes, it's time. We got to
animal part of my career.
I do actually have, I think when I'm reading the results further, I'll tell you where I think the mid-careers are doing this. Mm-hmm. And so one thing that I think is important to know too is now the results that I'm going to go on for are only for that 107 people that said yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, I do use animals.
So if you considered it, your survey is over. Thank you so much for filling out the survey.
Yeah. Well, I guess the second part everybody can answer, but this first part. And now they're saying, okay, 31% said they used it with one client, 43% they said that they use it with 2 to 5 clients, and 24% said that they have used animals with over 5 clients. So most of the intervention formats are individual sessions, which makes sense because we actually do most individual sessions, right? We don't do a lot of group sessions all the time, but so with the groups, they had 68%, groups only was 9%, and there was a combination of both groups and individual for 22% of the people. So this is where it's interesting. They're like, okay, now that you say you incorporate animals, what is their role? What do they do? Are they active? Do they do something, right? Do they have to sit? Do they participate in some way? Are you petting them? Are you taking care of them, which is one? Are you walking them? So are they an active participant? Are they passive, aka are they just in the room? You just bring them in and they can be lying on the floor and they're just there. That's their job, is to sleep next to you.
The donkey just took a seat in the corner and he just stayed there and brayed during
just
our
that
session.
Creepy dog that's like right in the corner. And then the third thing that they looked at is, did you use them as a reinforcer? So the majority of people used animals as a reinforcer for their sessions. Like, oh, you're in your home base. So their thing was like, oh yeah, people that are in their home might use their dog as a reinforcer if they love that. Right. So that was the majority.
Gotta point to all the pictures of Red before I'll let you pet your dog again. He's over there.
Yep. And then they looked at where it was happening, and they were really looking at it mostly occurred at a clinic or at a school. Surprisingly not in somebody's home.
I guess the number of donkey owners has dropped in the United States over the years.
I guess, yeah. And so then they described what they might have been doing. So some BCBAs described animal care chores such as feeding or walking. That makes sense, right? Probably we're feeding the cattle and donkey, right? One of the animals was a fish. The other thing they said was working on desensitization for animals, or teaching safe or appropriate interactions with animals. And 2 people said they were using animals as a coping strategy, which the authors will get into.
I don't count desensitization. I feel like desensitization to being near animals would not count as animal-assisted therapy so much as a component.
Yeah, but they're saying, do you incorporate animals into your practice, right? So there was animals there. So that's...
I guess.
But I think that's where the mid-careers are doing it, right? In this desensitization, teaching appropriate skills, because if you're working in those places, you might see that, and the parents might have that as a priority, right?
Yeah, like the feeding and the care of animals, that feels closer, but even that doesn't quite seem like what I'm thinking about when we talk about. But I don't know. I feel like when I hear animal assisted therapy, I'm thinking like the animal is a component of the therapy, not a component of a skill related to dealing with an animal or working.
But you have to think about it though, because the animal is still part of the. You have to think about the animal welfare. So we're gonna get into that too. So even if the animal, if you're like doing a coping strategy, or if you're teaching them how to interact with the animal is still present.
Yeah,
that's the problem, I guess, with some of these, right? So the animals that they talked about were dogs, horses, ponies, cats, guinea pigs, fish, cattle, and donkeys. But they don't say what they did with them, but I'm assuming they're taking care of cattle and donkeys and not like using them as coping strategies. Can you imagine if you were like, here's my service donkey.
Here's my service fish.
Here's my service fish. And so they said, okay, where did you get your animals? Most of them they got from like a therapy animal.org place, or it was their client's own personal animal, or the clinician's own personal animal, or the site-based animal, like some hospitals have like dogs, right? That they have that just come. And though the sad part here is, this is the concerning part, is when they said, okay, you're using an animal, 41% of the animals reported to have no or unknown training.
Yeah.
This is where it gets a little funk, right? Because there's no regulations or policies around what animals we can use. This is where it's getting a little bit silly and a little bit crazy, right? Because if dogs or horses or guinea pigs don't have any training and we're having kids interact with them, there's a higher likelihood that there's going to be risk for bites, risk for, injury. And if it's happening during your ABA session, it's going to be your fault.
Yeah. And if something is going to be called a therapy and there is no training on the part of an organism that is a component of that therapy, I call BS. That's not a therapy. That is just, they happen to be there.
Yeah. And so here they said only 19 dogs and horses had some sort of therapy training. And then some of them had just had obedience training, which is not at all the same, right? Especially if you're working with someone that's having like high anxiety around animals. You don't want the animal to feel that, and they talk about that. So 70% said that if they used animals, they saw positive effects only. Everyone agreed that using an animal is desirable, it's feasible, it's interesting. Everybody loves that. They're interested in doing it. But there are some barriers to doing that. And some of those barriers included no barriers at all. That's my favorite one. Lack of knowledge regarding AAI, that would be mine. Lack of time commitment for resources, finding, training, and implementing. Buy-in from the client. Safety concerns, which is good. Allergy concerns, liability concerns, fear, legal concerns, and ethical concerns. There's quite a few ethical concerns when you look at this. So the authors say, okay, everybody loves the idea of using animals, but as behavior analysts, we should be very careful if we are incorporating any sort of animal in adjunct with our ABA sessions, right? So they again remind us of the physical risks. Bites are top 3 in non-fatal illnesses for children. Most of the time, children and adults cannot read animal behavior, right? And so then, if a dog is giving you the eye, the side eye, right? We might not pick that up, and then they might bite, right? So that would not be great. And we need to be really careful. They're not saying never use it, but we'd be really careful to protect the clients, themselves, and also the animals, which we need to remember that the animals here, right? The animals are organisms that can also feel stress and may not want to participate and might not have a way to say that they don't want to participate unless they're going to bite you, right? And so they say if you're doing a desensitization program and you don't have the level of experience or training needed on the part of the animal, right? If you don't know the horse's warning signs or the dog's warning signs, then you may be making it worse. So you have to think and consider your level of experience there. And then they talk about the coping strategy. And so they said how respondents described animals here raises several questions and highlights the risk of incorporating animals that don't have the skills and qualifications to deal with these high anxiety levels, right? So remember they mentioned that dogs can feel stress. And so if you have a dog that you're using as a therapy dog that hasn't been trained as a therapy dog, you're going to have a higher risk that there's going to be a problem because they haven't learned and how to deal with the stress and that. So they said that service dogs may actually not be service dogs. They have a label called autism service dogs, but those dogs may not have the sufficient training to be a therapy dog. And so there's also issues there. And then they talk about liability risks. Right? It's never risk-free using an animal. You should have professional liability insurance, but it's unclear if these policies would cover a dog bite or injury. And if you had homeowners insurance, it's unclear if it would cover these during the ABA sessions. There's also credentialing risks, right? Do you have the level of expertise and training to be interacting with these animals outside of your BCBA? You should have additional credentials if you're using animals. And then thinking about animal welfare. There's a fine line between acceptable and exploitive human-animal interactions, and so it may not be appropriate to engage an animal with an activity that they weren't trained for, right? If you have a therapy dog, they weren't trained to be part of the ABA session, are you then overstepping that animal's bounds because they were only trained to do one thing, and now you're asking them to do more?
The ethics board of the animal therapy, they're going to crack down on that dog or whatever. They're going to send him a nasty letter. You know,
you are overworking the dog.
Oh,
burnt out. And so they said you have to think about different places where your dogs won't get stressed, right? So if a dog is unleashed in a setting that's familiar, they're going to be less stressed and less likely to act out if there is some issues. So ABA services are really supposed to be data-driven. We're supposed to be making decisions systematically, and it should be reasonable that if ABA clinicians are using different species other than humans as adjuncts in our ABA sessions, we should be directly monitoring and documenting stress behaviors of that animal. And I don't know if many behavior analysts have that training and expertise. Mm-hmm. So they say, I love it. They say you can, we're not saying no, but make sure that you have the proper training and expertise, you know about the animal, and you have a good reason why. So one of their big conclusion is, should you be working on the fear of a dog over other socially significant behaviors like something on the VB map? Like, what's your rationale there? Like, is it that important that the child is not scared of dogs but can't land? So I liked that conclusion. So they say that a ton of research needs to be done here because there isn't any, and that's why they had to do this survey.
Yeah. I appreciate that this kind of level of work is starting to come out. Though I am shocked that there were that many respondents saying, "Oh yeah, we use animals in our," because as someone who likes animals a lot but has very little experience with animals and has been to a couple webinars, especially a very excellent one that was done for Regis University, my friend of the show ran, and their partner, I realized there's so much that you need to know about working with animals to effectively work with animals. So to think you could just sort of slap a dog onto your treatment session and be like, yep, I'm doing animal-assisted therapy, I just think that does a disservice to the animals and the trainers and the professionals who have done all of this extra work. I think about some of the clips that were showed. How does this dog feel? I don't know. They're panting. I assume they're really happy. And I was like, no, not necessarily. There's a million things you need to be looking for that I'm not trained to look for. I don't know if this, the child I'm working with is about to get bitten or not. Who knows? So I'm I'm in favor of the idea of more exploration in this area. So please don't write in and say, oh no, I used it once and it was amazing. That's great. Good for you. If you don't have a data set that you're in prep right now, I think it still leads to the same concern of, is this a real therapy that has effectiveness? I'm not going to say...
We're not saying it's not.
I'm not going to say it's not, no. But I also don't want to... I'm not going to say it is either. I'm going to say I have no idea.
We need more research.
Interesting,
that's what we need.
But we need more research. Yeah, so any anecdotes, that's great, but it's not going to move the needle for me. I would need to see a pretty large data set. I would need to see it based on more than... I think the survey research was important. I'm not knocking the fact that this was only a survey paper, but that's the type of research I would want to see. I thought
you were going to say, I need research. And I want to see it now.
I demand it. Get me that donkey research on my desk tomorrow.
One time I met a miniature pony.
I have a picture of that.
And it sticks with me.
It was on our honeymoon.
It was on our honeymoon. It was the highlight of my honeymoon.
What?
Actually. The miniature pony.
We went on a ghost tour on that honeymoon, Diana. It was great. Tons of fun.
I have some pairings. I will go in order to match up with how we discussed. So, if you liked Rob's episode, if you liked Rob's
every episode
article,
is Rob's episode
related to enthusiastic praise, you might want to revisit, or for the first time visit, episode 47 on social reinforcer assessments. If you enjoyed my discussion of the good behavior game or the CBGG, then you might want to revisit episode 21, in which we discussed the good behavior game in depth, episode 83, which was another grab bag where we talked about another GBG article, or episode 102, in which we discussed PBIS, positive behavior intervention and support, because it touches on some of the same topics. And then if you enjoyed Jackie's discussion of AAI, then you might want to listen to episode 59, which is titled Puppies, with an exclamation point on the end, or episode 1002. The 1000s are book club episodes. And so this is a two-hour episode where we talk about Other End of the Leash, which I always want to call Life on the Leash, but that's not right.
That's a series of 90s t-shirts, I think, right?
I think so.
That's
This
off
is
the
an
leash.
Excellent book by Patricia McConnell.
Who we also had on a bonus episode.
Oh, yeah. And you could go look at that bonus episode, too. So
You should probably listen to it. Look at it. It's not as interesting.
We'll look at it. Decide if you want to listen. That's my recommendation.
Click the download button when you're looking at it.
So any of those episodes pair well with this episode. And I also think this episode pairs really well with this giant bag of popcorn that Rob and I bought today at BJ's before we hopped on. And it's a mixed bag. It's a grab bag, really.
It's a mixed bag,
if you will.
of popcorn.
And it has cheese pieces and caramel pieces, which you might not think go well together, but they pair perfectly, just like these articles.
How nice. But Diana, what should people pair with it if they loved all three of these articles?
I guess that you could enjoy the two flavors of popcorn, and then added to that, maybe like a smoothie.
A smoothie. That sounds good.
Yeah.
The ultimate grab
like
bag.
Strawberry smoothie.
Don't grab the blender while it's on, though. You gotta wait till it's over.
Don't do that.
Get a cup. All right. Well, now that we have something nice to enjoy, let's take this train on into the dissemination station.
We don't do dissemination station.
That was the joke. I love doing dissemination station, in which we say, but we don't really do a dissemination station for grab. But Jackie, you spoiled it. That was the fun joke.
I ruined it because I have to go soon.
Okay, but we don't do a dissemination station because, again, there's not really a theme necessarily in our episodes. We have a lot of other things to talk about. I guess the theme would be read lots of articles and enjoy discussing them with your friends, which is why we do these grab bags, because it's just kind of fun to talk about new articles that we might not have done a themed episode around. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed our grab bag. We hope maybe you do your own grab bag sometimes, too. If you have a fun article that you want to hear people talk about, well, why not write to us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. And if you like this discussion, we've got tons more. You can subscribe to us as ABA Inside Track anywhere you like to get your podcast. You can find these episodes posted on our YouTube page with the YouTube subtitling feature. You can find us on all the socials as ABA Inside Track, where you can tell us all about how the donkey intervention that you ran was the best intervention that's ever been run. That's great. Sounds good. You can also go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to all of the articles discussed on this episode, as well as to find links to all of our previous episodes and a place to purchase CEs. Let me tell you the second secret code word you're going to need if you're interested in CEs, and that's hazelnut. 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 Is it a nut or is it just a type of coffee? I never really knew.
It's a nut.
It's a nut.
Or
is it a legume?
It's a nut.
It's a nut.
Yeah.
All right. Hazelnut. And finally, if you want even more ABA Inside Track, including access to all of our 2-hour book club episodes, you can go to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where for $5 a month, you can get access to all of our episodes a week ahead of time, a chance to vote on our future book clubs, as well as our live episodes, and a free CE every quarter for those live episodes. Our most recent one was on a continuing discussion of conversion therapy with our book club guy, Alan Haberman. And at our $10 premium level, you can get access to all of our book clubs. I believe Other End of the Leash is now listed on our free feed, but we have 4 new ones every single year, including our upcoming, I think at the time of this release, we'll be almost ready to do our recording on the skeptical enhancing book, Calling Bullshit. That is going to be our latest book club for the spring season. And if you subscribe at the $10 level, you can get all those book clubs plus 2 CEs for free for all of those. So that's, again, patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. Finally, we want to say big thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. We'll be back next week with another full-length episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye!
Bye!